The moving castle's metal skeleton rumbled over the small town. A girl named Sophie was quietly sewing hats. The girls in the hat shop were surprised to see Howl's moving castle at the far foot of the hill. The castle walked alone in the open clouds. The girls were talking about the girl from the neighboring village who was seduced by Wizard Howl and had her heart eaten. However, not only were they not afraid, they also wanted to meet the famous, handsome, and gallant Master Howl. Sophie didn't really care. She finished making the hat and prepared to go out. The scene at this time was very noisy and bustling. Groups of soldiers were marching on the road along with the people's shouts. Sophie was very worried, so she had to go visit her sister, Letty. She walked to a small alley when suddenly 2 soldiers blocked her path and flirted with her. A blonde guy suddenly grabbed Sophie's shoulder. Without waiting for the 2 soldiers to say anything, the young man immediately waved his hand to control them away. Sophie still didn't know that this was the most handsome character of Wizard Howl in the Ghibli universe. He told her to calm down because someone was following him. From within the walls began to grow many slag-black demons. Then the boy hugged Sophie and soared into the air. He landed gently and then asked Sophie to follow him. He took her to the balcony of the restaurant where her sister was working and lured the monsters away. Letty, her younger sister, was a very beautiful person, and thanks to that, her business was very smooth. After hearing about the incident just now, she reminded Sophie that it could be Wizard Howl. Letty was very afraid that Howl would eat her sister's heart. Sophie was inherently a confident person, so when she heard her sister say it, she replied that Howl only eats the hearts of beautiful girls. Letty still kept worrying. This country was preparing for war. A wild witch was also wandering around this town, making everyone very scared. When Sophie was about to leave, Letty said she didn't want her sister to make hats all her life. Hopefully she would pursue her own dreams. But Sophie had no wishes. She thought she had an obligation to maintain the store her father left behind. Sophie returned to the store when a fat woman walked inside. This person started criticizing Sophie and her hats for being so rustic. This made Sophie angry, and she asked the guest to leave. She said she was the wild witch and suddenly flew right through Sophie. Before leaving, she also said something interesting. She couldn't tell anyone about this curse. Sophie lifted her head and discovered that she had been transformed into an old woman. After a moment of fear, she decided to go to sleep to regain her composure. When Sophie woke up, she completely accepted her new appearance. She even felt like she fit her new appearance. But because she couldn't tell anyone about the curse, she packed a few things and hitchhiked out of town to the winding valley to find a way to cure it. Turned into an old woman with difficulty walking, Sophie walked for only a short distance. While resting, she saw a piece of wood. She intended to pull it out to make a stick, but she didn't expect it to be a cursed radish-headed scarecrow. Sophie had to continue walking in the windy weather. Not having gone far, the radish ran to bring Sophie a stick. She said if it could help find a place to rest, that would be great. After listening, the radish turned around and left. Sophie had not continued on her way for long when she heard a loud noise behind the mountain. Howl's castle suddenly appeared before her eyes. It turned out that the radish had summoned the castle, so Sophie could rest inside. Sophie tried her best to climb up. Inside was an old, dirty, but very warm living room. Sophie saw that the fire on the stove was almost extinguished, so she immediately added more wood. It turned out that this was a fire demon called Calcifer. Calcifer immediately knew that Sophie was caught in the curse. He said he was bound to Howl with a contract, so he was stuck here. Calcifer's main task was to help the castle move. She wanted the fire demon to break her curse for her, but Calcifer asked her to break its contract to this castle first. Sophie didn't really believe the words of a fire demon, so she gradually fell asleep. The castle was still walking alone under the bright moonlight. War was getting closer and closer. The harbor next to the town was full of warships. Sophie was woken up by a knock on the door. Why was someone knocking on the moving castle? The boy ran down from upstairs. Sophie immediately pretended to be asleep. Wearing a round scarf, he disguised himself as an old man. He turned the door color palette, and the space outside immediately changed. The mayor brought a letter from the king wanting to join the war. After receiving the letter, he decided to ask about it. Sophie heard the doorbell ring again. The boy changed the color palette again, and the outside changed to another place. This time, it was also the son of the king of a neighboring country who wanted to join the war. Sophie went outside to look and saw that this was not a desert land. She kept opening each place curiously, making the boy angry. Go get bread and cheese to prepare breakfast. Sophie saw that and was about to fry more smoked river meat and eggs to make it more substantial, but the boy said Calcifer only listens to lies. Sophie immediately threatened Calcifer if she didn't listen, she would pour a bucket of water in his face. Mark was extremely surprised when Calcifer let Sophie cook. The color palette turned to black, then a blonde-haired guy entered. It turned out that Howl had returned. He saw Sophie but was not surprised at all and asked who Sophie was. She answered that she was a cleaner. Howl took the frying pan from Sophie's hand and told her to add meat and eggs. So breakfast was quickly served. They ate together at a messy table filled with furniture. Howl also asked what was in her bag. Sophie took out a red piece of paper. When Howl touched it, it immediately dissolved and left a few marks on the table. Howl immediately recognized the old woman in front of him as Sophie. She was hit by an ancient curse that could not be spoken. After breakfast, Sophie started cleaning the house, cleaning the kitchen, kitchen and cleaning the dirty and smelly bathroom. She started sweeping the floor and mopping again, forcing Calcifer to ask for help because it was about to die, but she set it aside to clean up. Seeing that the fire demon was about to extinguish, Howl was forced to save it. Calcifer said that if he died, Howl would also die, but Sophie didn't care. When she opened the window for fresh air, Sophie was overwhelmed by the majestic scenery. The castle was moving along the mountainside with an indescribably beautiful scenery. Standing on the balcony, Sophie accidentally saved the radish head again. When they reached the shore of the lake, they stopped to let everyone take their clothes out to dry. Sophie and Mark sat down to eat and admire the view, leaving the job of drying clothes to the radish head. At night, in a scene of warfare, Howl transformed into a large bird to confront the war henchmen until exhausted. Howl returned to the castle and transformed back into a human. Calcifer warned that if he kept flying like that, one day he wouldn't be able to return to human form. When passing by where Sophie slept, Howl saw her revert to her young form. The next day, Sophie and Mark went out to the market. The market was then very noisy and bustling, but then the king's ship was severely destroyed. Next, the spaceship dropped bombs from above, causing everyone to run away. As soon as the two got home, they heard Howl scream because his hair had changed color. Howl blamed Sophie for leaking the medicine bottles. He cried like a child in frustration and said if he wasn't handsome, then why would he live? His hair changed color continuously until it turned black. After a moment of commotion, Howl calmed down. He said he had chased a desert witch before, but when he realized that his beautiful appearance was due to magic, he ran away. That's why she searched for my heart. How many years had passed? He also said that when he joined the Magic Academy, he signed a pledge to serve the king when called. Howl suddenly came up with the idea of asking Sophie to pretend to be his mother and go to the king to refuse to participate in the war. After hearing this, Sophie agreed to help. Before leaving the house, Howl gave her a ring that he said was a talisman. He also promised Sophie that he would transform to follow and protect her. On the way, she saw a dog with golden fur appearing. Sophie saw this and thought that this definitely was Howl. The desert witch was also invited by the king. She laughed at Sophie for having to walk to the palace, but as soon as they reached the steps, the witch lost all her magic and could not continue, so she had to walk on her own. The stairs were very high, making the two of them sweat profusely. As soon as she entered the palace, she saw a chair, so the witch immediately ran to sit and rest. Unexpectedly, she was trapped by thorns and sat in the middle of the magic circle. Sophie was invited to another room to meet Suleiman, also the king's magical advisor, and the other blonde dog was the magician's dog sent to pick up Sophie. It seemed that Suleiman realized that Howl did not want to continue the war. She told him that she was his last student and intended for Howl to take his place in the future, but one day his heart was stolen by a demon and he stopped studying with her. If this continued, Howl would turn into the second desert witch. The desert witch was then pushed in as well. She had now been transformed into a frail and wrinkled old woman. Suleiman used that magic circle to remove all magic and turn her back to her true form. She threatened Sophie that if Howl did not come forward, the same outcome would result. Sophie unconsciously defended Howl eloquently. The more she talked, the younger her appearance became, and then turned back into a young woman. Suleiman asked, "Are you in love with Howl?" As soon as she heard it, she immediately turned back into an old woman. The king suddenly returned. He complained that war was boring. However, before he could say a few words, another king with the same face walked in. It turned out that the first king was transformed by Howl. Suleiman intended to arrest Howl, but he quickly put Sophie on the plane. The old witch and the dog also followed. The king's soldiers chased after him in large numbers. Howl instructed Sophie to take the wheel and told her to follow the directions back to the castle first, and he would create another copy to lure the soldiers away. The ring led her back to the castle, but Sophie didn't know how to stop the plane, so she crashed straight inside. At night, Howl returned with his whole body covered in bloody injuries. Sophie woke up and followed him upstairs and saw Howl had transformed into a huge monster. Sophie approached without fear. It turns out she truly loved Howl. Sophie woke up startled. It turned out it was just a dream. Howl, still healthy, ran down from upstairs. He questioned Calcifer why he let Solomon's witch and dog into the castle. Calcifer said it was because Sophie crashed inside, so Howl laughed loudly. Because they were captured by Solomon, they were forced to move house. Howl and Calcifer cast magic to make the whole castle transform in the blink of an eye. Howl then took Sophie to the castle door. Outside was now an extremely large flower step. Sophie saw that beautiful scene and happily transformed back into her female form. Soon, Howl took her up the mountain slope to show her the small house in the middle of the prairie. This was where Howl often went as a child. It was also the gift he wanted to give Sophie, but she was afraid he would leave. Sophie said she wanted to fight with him no matter what. Even if she were a monster, she wouldn't be afraid. Howl said he wanted Sophie to be happy and comfortable. Sophie became self-conscious again and said that she was not beautiful, so being Howl's cleaner was fun. Suddenly, the king's warship flew by. Howl was very disgusted with war, so he started using his magic that disrupts the spaceship's source of concentration. The soldiers discovered them, so they released small monsters to chase the two. Howl turned into a bird and took Sophie back into the castle. By the evening of the next day, Howl still hadn't returned, making Sophie very worried. The next day, Sophie's mother came to find her. Seeing her leave a small bag on the table, the desert witch immediately knew that this was Solomon's trick. She immediately opened the bag and caught a spy bug and threw it to Calcifer to eat. This weakened Calcifer's magic and he could no longer protect the castle. At night, the town was heavily bombed by a spaceship. Sophie ran out to see the situation in the form of a young girl. Because they no longer had Calcifer's protection, they were discovered by the demons. Sophie quickly ran inside. The warship continued to drop bombs on the house. At this time, Howl returned in time to hug the bomb that was heading towards the house. Luckily, it was pulled back in time so it didn't explode. Sophie saw that and immediately ran to hug him tightly. Then he took her back into the tower and sprinkled magic powder to wake up Calcifer. Howl intended to go out and continue fighting, but Sophie hugged him from behind and didn't want him to leave. Howl was determined to say he had been on the run for too long. Now he had something to protect, and that was her. Then Howl flew away. Sophie swung the space door out the other way and saw Howl being attacked on the warship. She understood that it was necessary to move house so that Howl could feel secure and not have to worry about them anymore.
Sophie took everyone and Calcifer out of the castle, letting it collapse into ruins in an instant. She then took everyone inside again, feeding Calcifer her hair for more energy. So a small castle stood up and walked away. The wild witch discovered Howl's heart was with Calcifer. She immediately clutched her heart, causing serious chaos. Calcifer burst into flames, burning the witch's hand. Because it was so urgent, Sophie poured a bucket of water on Calcifer, causing the small tower to collapse, and Sophie fell down the mountain. Calcifer once said that if the fire died out, Howl would also die, making her so worried. She cried. The ring on her hand suddenly glowed and pointed towards the tower door. Sophie went inside to her small house. When she stepped outside, she saw a meteor shower coming down. Time went back to Howl's teenage years. A shooting star fell into his hand, so he began to swallow it to fulfill the contract to use his heart in exchange for life in the fire demon. The ring on her hand melted, causing Sophie to fall into the black hole of time. As soon as Sophie wakes up, she'll come find you. Please wait for me in the future. After returning to the present, she saw Howl weakly waiting outside. They flew up to find the witch and Mark. Sophie hugged the witch and convinced her to return Howl's heart, and she agreed. Then she brought the heart to Howl's chest. Calcifer immediately turned back into a free meteor and happily flew away. Without Calcifer's ability, the castle immediately floated down the mountain. In the moment of danger, the rabbit head jumped forward to block it, so everyone was safe. Sophie was very grateful for his courage to protect everyone. The rabbit head gave him a kiss. Unexpectedly, this accidentally helped him break the curse. It turns out that the rabbit head was the missing prince of the neighboring country. It was also the cause of this war. Howl also woke up and was hugged by Sophie. The prince, knowing that his disappearance had led to the war, quickly returned to end everything. When everyone was saying goodbye to the prince, Calcifer returned and said he wanted to be with everyone. So the war officially ended. The castle was restored and flew in the clear blue sky. Sophie's curse caused her inner self to be exposed. The more self-conscious she was, the worse she looked on the outside. Only by being confident in herself could she turn back into a young woman. By the end of the movie, the curse could no longer affect Sophie's inner self. It could only be seen in the color of her hair. The movie ends here. What is your opinion on the movie? Leave a comment below. Now goodbye and see you again in the next recaps.